Thank you, Luciano, and well done for mastering your call. I'd like to pass the floor now straight to Dragos Tudorache. Dragos, you've been at the heart of all of this. What's your take on the key priorities for the next steps?
Well, good afternoon to everyone. I hope you see me and hear me. I'm actually doing this from the phone. Somehow my computer refused to connect to Zoom. It's funny. I always find it ironical when we talk about AI and high tech and we have these kind of issues still. Anyway, hoping that it's going to work from my phone. Challenges ahead, or how do I see the next cycle? Clearly, the next cycle is going to be about implementation as far as us Europeans are concerned. I think the debate, as we've also heard from Luciano before, we've had the debate on principles, we've had the debate on ethics, we've had the debate on regulation. Not all jurisdictions are yet aligned when it comes to the debate on regulation, but I'm convinced that in the not many years to come, actually, that alignment will slowly get there, simply because I think there's going to be a push for it, and also the effect of already the standards and the compliance that is going to happen here in Europe. But as far as we're concerned, now that we have the AI Act adopted, the next cycle is going to be about proving to ourselves, first and foremost, but also proving to anyone else out there who might be looking with interest at the model that we have just set up with the AI Act. We have to prove that it's actually workable. And it's not going to be an easy affair, an easy task, because it is a very complex piece of regulation, complex for everyone concerned, complex for the regulators, both European and national, complex for the companies that will have to comply, also complex for our citizens to understand, to absorb it. We have to be mindful of that, which means that, and I've been saying it for the last 2-3 months, I think all the energy right now, political, institutional, administrative, all the energy has to be put in making this work, in landing this piece of legislation, not only AI alone. Luciano said it before, in fact, we have to look at the whole set of digital regulation that we've passed during this mandate, because they all have to work in sync. DSA, DMA, Data Act, Data Governance Act, all of these, and of course the AI Act, all of these have to work in sync because they deal with the same realities, with the same technology, often also with the same players, the same actors, the same companies, but looking from different angles, from different perspectives, and therefore, particularly if we want to stay true to the objective of making sure that these regulation of ours are not going to stifle innovation, are not going to become barriers for creativity and growth, then again, we have a very serious duty as policymakers, as those that would be responsible for implementation, that we make this work in the right way. So what does that mean? I think for the regulators themselves, whether they are the European ones or the national ones, first of all, the challenge will be in being themselves technically up to the technical level to actually do what they're supposed to do. In other words, to actually be able to equip themselves with the right level of talent, to be able to not only take on as regulators of the cops, to take on the very powerful and certainly much better equipped in terms of expertise and talent private sector, and understand what they do so that they know exactly where to set the cursor in terms of how they enforce the regulation. So for that, again, time will tell. We have absolutely no way of knowing how that was going to go, because as we speak, the AI office is shaping up, is being recruiting, and national regulators haven't yet started. So the next 2 years are going to be crucial in seeing how the regulators are going to be ticking this box, i.e. attracting the right talent to be able to do their job, to develop the tools, to understand and develop methodologies, to take on methodologies and benchmarks and any other tools for measuring the trustworthy AI that will be developed in the other ecosystems outside of the regulators' remit, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, there's going to be the challenge of access and how kind of a relationship the regulators, but again, both European and national, will be developing with the subjects of the law to be able to have at the right time, in the right way, access to the models, to the solutions, to the applications, allowing them to measure them, to evaluate them, to make sure that they actually, again, implement the law in the right way. Not over-regulate, not under-regulate, not be too harsh, not be too lenient either. To understand and pitch their intervention in the market in the right way, again, to make sure that they do not come in the way of that very important objective of ours when we wrote the regulation, which is to also make sure that we are allowing for the potential of AI to unravel as it should here in the EU market. And this leads me to the third very important task for the regulators in the cycle to come, which is that they also understand their role as facilitators. The regulators under this new set of digital rules should not be regulators in the classical sense. They should not be seeing themselves and their role only as the police officers of these rules. They have to understand that they have a task of facilitating, of creating space for interaction, for dialogue with the business, because the business is the one who holds all the reins, all the cards in terms of skills and expertise, infrastructure, data. So all of the means of production in this new AI economy, they are in the hands of the private sector, and therefore, without a proper dialogue, properly understood dialogue with the side of the regulator, again, I think the implementation will be terribly missed. There is also a corresponding, I think, challenge, responsibility for the industry itself, who also needs to understand that not only that they actually have this societal role, which we have basically set out in the regulation, not only AI, but the other pieces of regulation as well. It was, from our point of view as European policymakers, it was about time that we recognize that in this digital industry, there is a responsibility which is borne also by those that are developing these platforms and these tools. This is what we've been doing with the DSA, now with the AI Act. But beyond that responsibility that companies need to understand they have, there's also, I think, a challenge for them in a positive way. They have to also be prepared to take on their role as partners in this dialogue, which I mentioned earlier, that the regulators have to understand that they must have with the private sector. That also has to be reciprocated on the other side. I think businesses need to play into this governance that we have created. There is a model of governance that actually builds a lot on the idea of communicating between the regulator and the subject of the law, and that dialogue, whether it's through the advisory board that we've created next to the AI office, or through the scientific committee, or through any of the other, in the sandboxes, in the AI factories, in all of these new parts of the governance that is being created at the EU level, in all of that dialogue and interaction, positive interaction between the industry and the regulator is necessary. And again, industry has to understand that they have also a stake and they have a role to play, and they have also, I think, something to gain if they engage properly with the regulators. Last but not least, there is going to still be a responsibility for us as policymakers. It didn't stop with the adoption of these rules. We'll have to be very mindful in how we exercise scrutiny as to how these rules are being implemented. We'll have to be very agile ourselves as politicians and continuing to do that. We also have to abstain from the temptation that we keep on regulating. There'll be new things that will be coming. AI will represent still a very sexy topic in the years to come. It's enough to open the news almost every day and there is something about AI in them. Which means that there will be this temptation with politicians, whether European or national, to still add or come up with new ideas of what to add to the existing regulation. My take would be to actually stop, to not do that, to abstain from further intervening in a market that we have now, I think, bestowed with enough rules, and these rules now again need to be landed, need to be implemented before we would consider, I think, additional rulemaking. So I think abstaining will also be a great challenge for the policymakers. And last but not least, I think policymakers, politicians also will have a duty in the coming years to explain, to translate all of these changes, all of this new revolution to the people out there, to those that ultimately have to have trust in what's happening, trust in the technology, trust in the role of the technology, in the interaction of the technology with their lives. And again, it is us politicians who have the duty to explain, to translate, to alleviate fears and concerns. That is why we have the regulation in the first place, to address concerns and risks that are out there. But again, that needs to be explained. And also the issues related to education, to the labor market, to the impact of AI on the labor market, all those things which are not in the regulation, which are still left for the realm of member state policies and regulations to implement, because these are not things that can be done at EU level. It's a gargantuan task ahead for the politicians still to address, to make sure that, again, this is not something that happens against people or leaving parts of our society feeling unduly taken care of in this digital transformation, because that will create resentment, that will create the opposite of what we need in order to make sure that AI and these emerging techs in general represent indeed an engine for growth, for trust in society, and not the other way around. So I think I've taken enough time. I'll stop here and happy to come back for any other specific points. Thank you.
That's a masterful overview, Dragos, and I like very much the idea of regulators as facilitators and maybe even co-learners, the society role for industry, and even the duty of modesty for legislators and policymakers. That's really quite good. One question which has been raised in the question and answer chat is around the interoperability of what we're doing in AI with what everybody else is doing. And I think as we talk in Seoul, governments are busy trying to stitch things together, but maybe they will just invent other processes. And also the interoperability between this piece of legislation for AI and other pieces in the digital world. Can you just give us a soundbite on those two aspects of interoperability and synergy?
Well, as we speak, leaders have virtually met in Seoul, and the ministers of digital are going to meet physically tomorrow. And this is the follow-up to the Bletchley Park summit of last summer, and the intermezzo before the big show that I understand will follow in Paris in February of next year. And already, if we look at the scope of the South Korea summit going on today and tomorrow, it is much broader already than the conversation that took place in Bletchley Park in autumn of last year, which was narrowly focused on the issue of safety and the very top models and the safety elements linked to, in other words, if you did not build a bomb, it was not part of the conversation. Whereas already now the discussion in Seoul is much broader than that. And from what I understand, the plans for the Paris summit of next year are even going to be broader than what the Seoul conversation today and tomorrow is about. Why am I saying it linked to interoperability? Is because there is now a realization across jurisdictions, and not only across democracies and jurisdictions in democracies, across jurisdictions, including the non-democracies out there, that AI is a topic which needs to be part of a conversation between friends, between friendly competitors, but also between adversaries. No one can afford, from my point of view, to stay out of the conversation, because the challenges that AI is putting out there for us, as well as the benefits, by the way. I'm not an alarmist, so I don't want to only speak of the risks. But whether you look at the huge potential and benefits of AI, or whether you're looking at the risks of AI, again, they feature pretty much the same, whether you're in China or in Washington or in Brussels or in Brazil. So that means that somehow, again, neither of us can afford to think in our own little corners. We have to reach out towards each other. We have to create the spaces for interaction. It's right what Luciano was saying earlier about the principles, when everyone and their dog had their own set of principles. And now, of course, there is the risk that everyone and their dog will have their own version of the regulation. But this is where I always say that I don't actually think that there are many different ways in which you can formulate obligations for trustworthy AI. Whether you like it or not, whether you're going to look at the European model or not, doesn't matter. You will have to eventually end up talking about the risks of AI, because you can't regulate the technology itself. So you'll have to regulate its applications, and therefore you'll have to then look at the applications that are causing concern and risks, and you'll have to address those risks. And when you address those risks, again, there aren't a million ways to do that. So I think there will be inevitably an evolution of the different instruments at national level that will be used to put in some rules in place. There'll still be variations between how hard law or how soft law those rules will be, but I think the rules will not be very much dissimilar, which means that then the conversation is, how do we bring them all together in a framework? UN is trying now to create this global governance framework. I don't necessarily think that that is going to be much of a success for reasons that we can discuss, but it's going to take time. I actually think, rather than these efforts of through these summits of actually bringing everyone around a set of common goals and around a possible framework for continuing the conversation, I think might have greater chances of success. And I think that the summit in Paris in February next year is a very good candidate for being such a breakthrough moment. Yeah. And I don't know if sorry, go ahead.
That was a great soundbite, but thanks very much. I couldn't resist